What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of Tallboys.
And Trackmasters.
Well, as always, sir, how was your weekend?
Pretty good. Got over to go do some trout fishing, and wish I would have spent a little bit more of that time wrenching on my bike. So I just got everything back together earlier tonight.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Gotta get ready for the Coalfields ride coming up.
Yeah, just doing some deferred maintenance that needed done, and you get those direct fit parts that end up taking hours to get put on. So happens.
You'll have that.
Yeah.
We appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. Like I said, this is episode 13, and we're going to talk about badge or brand engineering. Now, this is really prevalent in the motorcycle industry, but it's probably more prevalent in the automotive industry. So, for those of you who don't know what this means, it's very common these days for auto manufacturers or motorcycle manufacturers to want to get into the market in a different segment, so to speak. And instead of them doing their diligence and research and development to create something themselves, they might look and see that there's another manufacturer that already has something that they want to use. So they take the easy way out and just buy that and slap their stickers and badges on it. And we're going to go over that this evening. And there's a lot of that. It's definitely happening in our industry, especially the dual sport and adventure motorcycle market. And we're going to kind of talk and go over that because I think it'll make an interesting topic. So,
Agreed. Who do you want to start out with?
Well, I think we'll go around the world a little bit. Maybe start with the Japanese,
Sure.
Since they're kind of probably the least guilty of doing this.
Coincidentally, they're the ones that everyone complains about. Nothing but bold new graphics, stuff like that. Like they're notoriously slow to release new tech.
Yeah.
That's kind of a double-edged sword. They rely heavily on proven platforms, proven tech. They're slow to adopt, which means they spend a good bit of time in research and development, working out the bugs, and trying to get something that's going to be reliable over something that's just cutting edge.
Yep. Yeah, it seems like they're kind of afraid to spend the money. They're making the money hand over fist because people are still buying that old technology.
Yep.
So why upset the apple cart and just continue doing what you're doing because they're making money?
You have such a huge startup cost of research and development for one of those projects that you look at a bike like the TW200 that's functionally unchanged, save for front disc brake they got around 2000 or 2001. It's functionally unchanged since the late 80s. Like the research and development on that bike was paid for decades and decades and decades ago. Same with DRZ 400, DR 650, XR 650L. All these bikes, that big initial research development cost is shared over so many years and so many units that it's negligible.
Yep.
And it's a really big undertaking, especially for a smaller company like Suzuki or Yamaha to undergo essentially a whole new engine architecture, design, the whole nine yards.
Yep. It's the sight of the dollar outweighs the cries of the market share. Guys have wanted a 6-gear in the DRZ 400 for years. New suspension on any of the Japanese 650s. And even when they do kind of listen and try to upgrade things, like take the new KLR 650, for example, then there's drawbacks. Hey, we finally got fuel injection, but now the thing weighs 30 pounds heavier. We still haven't upgraded the doohickey that we've needed to do for 30 some years. And
or the thermostat issue.
Yeah.
They didn't fix that either. So, but
so kind of getting back on topic a little bit. One of the real big first kind of whoa moments in this topic would probably be around 2002 and 2003 when Suzuki and Kawasaki decided to do a merger partnership, which was kind of unheard of in that industry, that two competitors like that would want to team up. And really, you got to think back in that time, Honda had dominated so much of the market in every category, whether it was race bikes, trail bikes, street legal dual sports. I mean, just think around that time of all the offerings that Honda had out there, all the XR trail bike lines from, you got to think they made XRs from 50s up to 650Rs and everything in between. So they were absolutely just dominating the market with anything they came out with. 03 was the first year for the CRF 450 four-stroke race bike. So Suzuki and Kawasaki decided to partner up, use each other's technologies, and it was really a way for Suzuki to kind of enter that beginner trail market. Mm-hmm. And it was also a way for Suzuki to get their foothold in some other markets that they didn't have really an opening in. And some of the real common models were the KX65 and 100 two-strokes got some yellow plastic and became RM65s and 100 to let Suzuki have more of a beginner off-road two-stroke, rider market. You had the KX and RMZ 250S, which was pretty much a good success for both of those parties. The bikes were manufactured by Kawasaki, and then you could get them with RMZ yellow plastic on them. And it's kind of funny because when all this was going on, you had no idea what the manufacturer on the frame was going to say. One would say Kawasaki and had yellow Suzuki plastic, and one would be the opposite way. And the 250S were fun, and the partnership didn't last that long. So, like, I know on the RMZ 250 and KX 250F front, you had the two for 04 and 05. They were all the same. In 2006, Kawasaki had kind of finally decided it was time to do their own thing and came out with the aluminum frame KX 250F, and Suzuki continued to use the steel frame kind of cooperation bike until 05 and decided to do their own thing in 06 and then 07. And kind of getting back towards like the dual sport market, obviously the DRZ 400 was a huge success. Kawasaki wanted in on that success. They didn't really have a bigger bore dual sport bike other than the KLX. I believe was the 250 at that time. They kind of gone.
Yeah, they still had the KLX 250, and then there was more of the adventure bike side of the KLR 650. Mm-hmm. I know where you're going with this, and I've always wanted to see one in person. It's at KLX 400, which is a DRZ 400 with with green plastics, but
yeah, it. I think they only made those for from 03 to 05. It was a
pretty short time span.
Yeah, and it's literally a green DRZ. And that's, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I know there was a lot of four-wheelers that went back and forth. I know we don't really get into that a whole lot, but some flies around here. The four-wheeler one was funny because Suzuki had the Z400, which was a pretty popular four-wheeler. And Kawasaki latched onto that with the KFX 400. And then you had, I believe it was Arctic Cat made a 400, CF Moto made a 400. Like, you had like 9 different companies making the same four-wheeler. Yep. Take your pick. Colors of the rainbow. Yeah. Well, I don't really think of any other Japanese copies like that came about. I don't know if there's
I can't really either. I think the DR 125, like the little trail bike, was based off of, I can't remember what company's architecture.
Yeah.
But I mean it's identical more or less to.
Yeah. I think another thing we kind of touch on too is the Japanese reliance, it seems these days, on manufacturing things in Thailand. I know that Thailand and in Indonesia, a lot of your like smaller bore dual sport bikes, and especially those that are in the air cooled side of things, the kind of bare bones basic ones, you'd be surprised to find out that 99% of that bike is manufactured in the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, that type of area. I know there's a lot of stuff on the KLX 250 that's produced in
CRF 250, or I guess now the 300L and all that, as far as I know, are very much largely produced in Thailand, that
Yep.
area. I'm sure there's components on there that are still, excuse me, that are still manufactured in Japan and probably various other places because, this is a globalized economy. And I mean, it's like anywhere else. As long as the quality control is in place and, you know, things are paid attention to, as long as they're not just casting engine cases out of pop metal from pop cans and aluminum rims and, it, I don't have any issue with it. But what I kind of take issue with is, I'd say most people viewing or familiar with what happened to Craftsman. They'd created a name for themselves as, a pretty well-built tool brand in the United States. It was built in America, and then they sold out with Sears and all that, and now it's just another made in China, kind of bottom of the barrel, like it's barely a step above Harbor Freight in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I don't like companies that just coast off a name.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that these Japanese manufacturers are doing that, because obviously they're still building reliable machines, but they definitely don't make it apparent to say, we're no longer manufacturing these in Japan. Whereas a lot of people that hop on a Honda are probably still envisioning this thing rolling off the assembly line in Japan.
Yeah.
But as it's true for a lot of the smaller bikes, but I'm pretty sure that the Africa Twin, at least, is still built, assembled, etc. in Japan.
Yeah.
They've just kind of, quote, offshored their lighter models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's very evident, especially, I don't know if you've seen the new, I don't know if they're calling it XR CRF 150L.
Yeah, that looks
exactly like the Hawk 250
yes,
Amazon
that's
bike.
what I was going to say. So
100%.
that's something I really wanted to bring up, actually, because if that's an indicator for where the market's heading, I'm pretty worried for the future of the Japanese brands. There's nothing that you can tell me to convince me that Honda couldn't. I'm not saying that they didn't develop their own, but it definitely shares way too many similarities with one of the bikes that you could buy for like $2,000 off Amazon.
Yeah.
And
now we're definitely going to get into the Chinese aspect of this
heavily.
It's dominating this topic 100%. Now, I will say, before we really get into that, as far as the Chinese bikes go, the RPS Hawk that you can buy off of Amazon really, honestly, is a decent motorcycle. There's so many people that have bought them and have figured out what to look for before you even assemble the thing, that it's honestly, for a beginner's choice, it's actually pretty tough. I know there's a lot of videos on YouTube. The guy that I follow, Moto Cheese, he was one of the first guys to ever buy one of those things and kind of go through it. And if you need to know anything about one of those little Hawk 250s, that's the guy to go to. And I would say, as long as Honda kind of maybe ups the quality control just a little bit,
sure,
it'd be worth it. But at the same time, the bike is almost $1,000 more to have Honda graphics put on it versus the Hawk 250, which you can buy a red Hawk 250 from Amazon, get the Honda graphics, and throw on it.
So the deal with I guess we'll just go ahead and segue into it. The Chinese bikes, you mentioned the guy you watch on YouTube. I'll go ahead and plug a forum called China Riders.
Yep.
I've been on there. There's some guys that have upwards of 60,000 miles on all original motors. It's not that they can't produce, reliable equipment. If I remember right, one of the engine manufacturers out of China has produced the largest number of small engines in history.
Yep.
Mostly produced off of Honda CT 125 scooter engines.
Yep.
They proceeded to put in literally everything: kids' pit bikes, scooters that you can buy for $1,500, $2,000 or something like that. And once upon a time, pre-COVID, for me at least, my advice to people was, instead of spending $2,000 on this brand new Chinese bike from Amazon, is to look around on Facebook Marketplace, etc., and spend your money on a used Japanese bike. That's out the window, because obviously the prices of everything have gotten pretty wacky the last couple of years, and don't seem to be cooling off near as fast as I thought they would.
Yeah.
If it gets somebody interested in it, I have zero problems whatsoever. I got my start into dual sporting on a Yamaha TW200. I went from that to various other bikes, and but that's what got me into it. It made like 8 horsepower and struggled to do 55 on a flat road. But I mean, if it's got 2 wheels and a motor, it's close enough to get you into it. You can figure out from there whether or not you want to invest a little bit more money into the hobby. I would rather see somebody do that than go out and somebody that's flush with cash, obviously, is be one of the guys that goes out and buys a brand new KTM 500 EXC and then puts 3 hours on it and sells it.
Yeah.
So, but the biggest downside, save for reliability on Chinese bikes, is parts availability.
Yep.
My Yamaha, Kawasaki, and KTM, I can go to the respective parts counters and have exactly what I need at a reasonable time scale, versus some of these bikes, unless there is a US based distributor. And this might be a good time to talk about your experience with ordering a Chinese bike that had a US distributor, thinking that you would be clear of the parts availability issues and things like that. But normal wear and tear items like your brake pads, sprockets, fork seals, things like that, wheel bearings, they're not going to tell you in the manual, oh yeah, this is just a DRZ 125 front end.
Yeah.
Parts from that will fit this. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
There is no information like that unless you weigh heavily on a forum like ChinaRiders.com, where there are guys that have compiled vast amounts of resources as to what fits what, to save you the headache of trying to source parts directly from China, the manufacturer of whatever, every time you need them.
Yep. Yeah, you're 100% right. For better or worse, I have a lot of experience with the Chinese motorcycles. I'll be honest with you, my YouTube channel that I have, 99% of the people that watch my stuff want to see the Chinese things that I've uploaded, whether it be an SSR or a GPX, which are kind of the 2 main players as far as Chinese motorcycles go. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit. And we'll start with probably the, in my opinion, before I forget too, rocking Brian Holmes's new iADV gear. Shout out to Brian Holmes. Check out his iMat website. He's got T-shirts and hats. Super comfy shirt. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. We're going to start with my favorite Chinese manufacturer.
SSR. Yep.
So, SSR is the U.S. distributor for the Chinese mega corporation named Lonson. Lonson partnered up with Honda back in the early 2004-2005 era. They were actually manufacturing CRF 250R and the CRF 450R engines, some of the frame and swing arm parts. It's actually astounding to look up just how much of that race bike was actually being produced in China. And the partnership was for 10 years. Once the partnership expired and their contract expired, Lonson got all of the intellectual property and the tooling to keep producing that generation of bike. And this also goes for the CRF 50, the XR 70, all those little kind of horizontal air-cooled 4-stroke engines. So Lonson decided after that contract had expired that they wanted to get into the full-size motorcycle market. So they ended up coming out with their SSR 250 and 450. Now, the 250 is a copy of the frame and chassis work anyway, is a copy of a CRF 250X. Now, the engine itself is from a different Chinese manufacturer called Zhongshan. Zhongshan has been producing engines for everybody in the entire world that you can think of. Everyone from BMW.
That's the company that I was trying to think of earlier. It's
Yep.
produced the single largest volume of small engines in history.
They have.
Zongshin has, and
So,
as somebody that's involved in like the machining manufacturing realm, I've watched videos of their machining and assembly lines, and I guarantee you it's not what you think it's going to be.
yeah.
It pretty much looks like a clean room with automated equipment inside of it, which I've said in the past, as long as your quality control is good, a carbide end mill cuts the same in the U.S. as it does in China.
Yeah.
Chances are it was made there anyway.
Yeah.
And as long as you can hold the tolerances that you need to design to, I don't see an issue from a quality standpoint.
Yep. So, like I was saying, the SSR 250, the chassis and everything is 100% Honda 250X. So if you need brakes, suspension parts, any of the ergos, seats, handlebars, all that stuff is CRF 250X. The engine itself, though, is manufactured by Zongshin. So anything you need parts-wise, you have to order from them. And eBay is your best bet there. There's plenty of stuff on eBay. Alibaba has a lot of stuff, but I know that's kind of a shady website to order some stuff from. You can order complete engines from them for less than $1,300, so it's not even worth rebuilding anything on that bike.
Yep.
Now, the 450, which is one that I had, and the reason why I bought that thing, I saw it on Marketplace for sale. I looked it up, and there was absolutely nothing out there about the SSR 450 on YouTube, especially, but anything at all. And I thought the bike was cheap. I thought maybe it'd make a good trail / race bike and be fun to go out there and compete on the Chinese 450. So minimal investment, big return. I bought the thing, and the SSR 450 is a 100% copy of the CRF 450X. Matter of fact, Christini, who makes the two-wheel drive motorcycles, offers the 450, right?
Yep, which is also a copy of.
Well, the Christini two-wheel drive motorcycle is an SSR 450.
Yes.
They put the two-wheel drive stuff on. They're not buying Honda 450s at retail price and then making all those different modifications to make the two-wheel drive system work. They're getting in as cheap as they can. So in a roundabout way, this is absolutely hilarious to me. The U.S. military uses the 450 two-wheel drive bikes in their special operations. The U.S. military thinks SSR is good enough. I think it's good enough for every Joe and Blow.
I've seen what else the U.S. military thought was good enough to push into service. I don't know about that. People say, "Oh, it's military grade." It's like, "Oh, cool." So it met the bare minimum specifications at the cheapest possible price. But that's actually really interesting. That's not really something I'd ever considered. I never put two and two together.
Yep.
I was aware that Christini was using Chinese-based bikes. And I knew that the U.S. military had some Christinis in service, but I never put two and two together that the U.S. military, our tax dollars essentially paid for Chinese two-wheel drive Chinese dirt bikes.
Yep, it's pretty wild when you actually think about it. Now, I had really, really good luck out of my SSR 450, and one of the key things about that is it was a straight up copy of a CRF 450X. So no matter what you needed, I could go to any parts store. Rocky Mountain Motorsport was going to have the parts in stock. It was like a 2008 CRF 450X. And I mean, even down to like the modifications to make those things run better, like going to an FCR style carburetor, snipping the blue ignition wire, all that stuff was on that bike. It was the same. So no matter what you did to it, would work, same for the 450X.
See, as long as you can go in with that level of knowledge, that would make me a lot more comfortable with owning one. But the problem is, a lot of these you get Yamaha rims on, Honda forks, and it'll have like a chopped and messed up Husky copy frame, and I don't know. It just it's not for me.
Yeah,
but.
Now
For somebody getting into it, I could definitely see the allure, because even the budget Japanese bikes, Well, first of all, you're never going to get it for MSRP. Those days are gone and over with.
No.
Dealerships are trying to make up 2 years of lost profits in the span of 3 or 4 sales.
Mm-hmm.
But 6, 7 grand, 8 grand by the time you're out the door. I know there's people out there that pay like 10 grand for one of the new KLRs after all the crating fees and junk. That is a really, really tough pill to swallow for most people. And I would rather see somebody buy a cheaper bike and then spend the money on gear than do the opposite. So, like I said, I think that Chinese bikes definitely have their place, and every day that passes, there's more and more resources out there on the forums and stuff for people that want to utilize them.
Yeah, SSR is to me the brand to get if you're looking to get into a cheap bike. You don't mind Chinese. And the thing about them is you can go into like Leeson's right down the road here in Bridgeport sells SSR. You can outfit the entire family with motorcycles for less than $15,000.
Yep.
The 450 is like, I think 6,000 out the door with all the MSRP adjustments and inflation. The little 70s and 50s and 110s are under $1,000. The 250s are cheap. The little 189s, like you can get the whole family out there in the dirt for dirt cheap, and them being a pretty much direct rip-off copy of a Honda means the parts availability is there.
Yep.
Now, the problem with the Chinese companies comes whenever they decide to kind of go off on their own a little bit, which is when we're going to get into my
that was something experience to touch on too.
Yeah, my horrible experience with GPX.
Well, I'll kind of start that off. Chinese companies seem to be really good at copying, likely because they've engaged in some level of IP theft, or in some cases, I know that companies will share IP in exchange for, okay, you're going to manufacture these components for 5 years. Following that, when we retire this engine, we'll give you the drawings and the inspection plans, assembly level drawings, and all that stuff. But it seems that when they decide to start trying to, it's like they can copy, but they can't innovate.
Yeah.
Like everything seems to be some kind of copy, and even things that seem to be like an innovation, it'll boil down to, oh yeah, we just bastardized a Kawasaki 4-stroke head and put it on a Honda Jug. Like it's something just odd like that you wouldn't even think of.
Yeah. Now, GPX, man, they had so much potential, it seemed like, to start out with. I know their first bike was the TSE 250 2-stroke, which, in all honesty, I'd love to try to throw a leg over one day and give it a chance. The TSE 250 was a WR200 liquid-cooled Yamaha engine from the early 90s, and overseas they got, I believe it was the DT250 and WR250 that we didn't get. But they bought the factory that built those engines, kept all the tooling, and then they shoehorned it into a Husky, a modern Husky frame, like a 2017 and up Husky, 250F, 350, 450 frame. And it was sort of well executed. I know that, you still had a lot of issues with Chinese bearing specs, and once you upgraded stuff that was Chinese to Husqvarna on the chassis that fit, that was fine. The problem was when you couldn't get oil injection parts for that engine because it's been discontinued forever. They had trouble with the thermostat, water hoses, all just a myriad of problems. And that's when the lack of a dealer network kicked in with GPX. You had, it's based out of U.S. Motor Toys in Utah. There's nothing else in the United States as far as a dealer network that carries hard parts. You have dealers all over the place that sell these bikes because they come in a crate and they're easy to put together. But whenever you need actual parts that you can't get for your engine on that bike, so to speak, you're stuck with getting a hold of GPX. They have to submit the order to China. You're waiting 3 to 4 weeks on it to be manufactured in China because they don't carry any hard parts in stock. It has to get shipped to Utah and then get shipped to you. And that's the huge issue with GPX. There is a total lack of a hard parts dealer network.
that is virtually every single Chinese manufacturer. I know that
It really is.
a subsidiary of GPX, whether they want to make it apparent or not, is the Cove or Cove. If any of you follow the Dakar Rally,
Yeah.
I highly suggest you do, because it's just absolutely insane. To Cove's credit, they did finish the stage they raced. However, it is just a GPX with a different name, a different plastic. So now you have a brand engineered bike of a brand engineered bike. You have a brand engineered copy of a Honda, which is
Yeah.
just interesting. Like, to
Yeah.
sit down and actually put it in words, it's just crazy.
Yeah, that's the issue. So even like the 300, the 450 four-strokes, which it's Zongshin engines, but with horrible Delphi fuel injection, like the bare minimum fuel injection. I would rather have a carburetor on that 450 that I had. It would have been easier to ride. But as you said, man, the Cove 450 rally. So everybody's all on board about this thing. It's a cheap way to get into what everybody wants. Everybody wants the manufacturers to design that rally bike. What's up?
Is it cheap though? Because once you actually option out like the decent suspension, the decent hard parts thing, you're beyond like 14 grand.
They have two separate editions. They have like the Rally Race Edition, which is the exact same bike the guys raced in Dakar. Yeah, you're over $14,000 for a Chinese motorcycle. The other version is the more tame, kind of base model, which is still about $8,000 for a Chinese motorcycle. That has a Zongshin NC 450 dual overhead cam engine that just came out that you cannot get parts for.
Yep.
The chassis itself is not based off of a Husky copy. It's its own ideology, which
That's kind of terrifying.
Yeah. The plastic, everything on the thing is proprietary to Cove, which hats off for them for trying, but you're going to run into the issue where you're not going to be able to get parts for the thing when it breaks. Me and you both follow Tyler from Everride on YouTube, and he's one of the best guys out there for dual sport and adventure content. He tried one out and loved it so much that he bought one. And I actually took it upon myself to comment on his video and warn him, listen, man, I know you like this thing, but you need to watch out. You're not going to be able to get parts for the thing.
Yep.
I don't think that even everybody buying that motorcycle is going to change that mantra of a dealership like U.S. Motor Toys being just a distributor.
Yep.
They don't have the space, the time, the people, the resources to keep those hard parts in stock, let alone the little fly-by-night mom and pop shops that sell a couple bikes a year that pop up on your street corner. They're not going to be able to keep all the parts in stock. The logistics and the resources just aren't there for them to succeed, I don't think.
Yep, I agree. And I think a lot of people on the topic of that Cove Rally are going to purchase it with the intent of making it a dual sport. It is not going to be like registering your KTM 500 EXC. I can tell you that right now, because I've seen a photograph of the title for one, and it says off-road motorcycle. So you're going to have to use a service like dirt2legal.com or one of the various loophole states to actually get that titled. Now, that was, when they first came out. It might have changed since then.
I'm not sure about the Cove Rally, especially like the base model one that's the cheaper one. But I know like my GPX 450 actually did come with a motorcycle title. It didn't say off-road or anything like that. And in West Virginia, it was very easy to get that thing legal. Now, there's a whole dedicated forum on there on Facebook to the states that you can and can't get those GPX 450 and adventure bikes legal. And it's hit or miss. I mean, obviously, your more strict states like Oregon, California, forget it. It's not going to happen. But really, your more leeway states, Ohio, North Carolina, West Virginia, for example, it's going to be a little bit easier. But to spend $8,000 on an unproven motorcycle that you can't get parts for, and you're not sure if you're going to get street legal, is absolutely mind blowing to me. For $8,000, you can buy a gently used KTM, any type of a full-on spec'd out Suzuki DR650.
You absolutely
have something you can actually get parts for. I don't understand the mindset to try to buy something like that.
For what it's worth, I think Arthur's 350 EXC was out the door around 12 grand, which was a really good price for a 2023 model. Personally, I would much rather just save my money a little bit longer and get into it, because obviously people aren't buying the Cove Rally as their first bike. So I would just keep riding what I got until I'd had the money for it. But speaking of KTM, they've really established themselves as a brand engineering company. I think it's time to start talking about that. I ordered a relay for the fan. I went to remove it so I could install a radiator fan on-off switch, and I broke mine, so I had to order one. I ordered it from a parts warehouse I use a lot that's based in Texas, and I got this little box. It says KTM, Husqvarna, and Husaberg. So I imagine there was quite a bit of dust on this relay box when they got it off, because Husaberg went defunct in what year? Do you remember?
It was the first year that KTM had acquired Husqvarna.
Yep.
It was I don't know, 2012-ish, 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. Yep. I mean, it's funny, you know, everybody has brand loyalty in their favorite manufacturers. None of these manufacturers are innocent of doing what we're talking about tonight. And KTM anymore seems like the Thanos of the motorcycle world for my Marvel guys out there. They're just slowly collecting the infinity stones of every single manufacturer that you can think of and putting them under that Pierre Mobility umbrella.
And they all just become the same, almost the same bike. I mean, there's some differences, but functionally, between the gas and the Husqvarna and the KTM, they are very, 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 very close to being the exact same motorcycle.
Yeah.
I know for the dual sport models, at least, the Husqvarnas have a little bit more high quality brake componentry, and I think the rear subframes are composite, which is absolute garbage. I would not suggest owning a composite subframe bike. It'd be great if they were cheap, but they break easy. I don't know that KTM's addressed it, and they're very expensive to replace. And you can't put a rear rack on one like you can an aluminum subframe.
Yeah.
But then Gas started out as being kind of the working man's brand, but now the price spread between the three is getting smaller and smaller and smaller with each passing year.
Yep. Yeah, the Huskies, you know, they have the composite subframe, a little bit different body work.
Yep.
Linkage rear shock versus the KTM PDS style, which I've ridden both, and honestly, I don't know. I can't tell enough of a difference between the two. I actually kind of like the PDS because there's just less maintenance involved.
Yep.
You don't have more linkage bearings to have to worry about.
I like it because it makes hopping logs a breeze, whereas there's several times, like with my Kawasaki, I about went over the bars because that giant linkage would hang up. So having a nice flat skid on the bottom has been fantastic. But
KTM just wants to acquire everything. It seems like, you know, they bought the Gas brand. You know, as you said, Gas. They're kind of monikering it as the cheap version of a KTM or a Husky.
Yeah,
there's just a few little components that really are cheaper. Like I think they use cast wheels and cast triple clamps and red plastic. It's really not that much difference.
The price difference isn't that much either.
It's not. I know they don't come with map switch, but you can buy the map switch for a KTM or Husky. It plugs right into the gas. It's insane to. I mean, they act like they're the General Motors of the motorcycle world now. Do you want a Pontiac, a GMC, a Buick, or a Geo, a Saab?
Hey, I think the good comparison that we can start into here is, you know, I brought up Geo. Let's talk about this Indian company that has like a 48% stake in ATM as a whole, which to me blew my mind. BAJJ.
AG. It's 48% of KTM AG. Now, what does that? Is that KTM in general? Is that a shell company of KTM for India? I'm not sure.
It's just a subsidiary of KTM. Obviously, KTM, Husqvarna, etc., are owned by this large conglomerate. I think that Bajaj owns stake in KTM's subsidiary specifically.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. That's just speculation. And don't take your market advice from guys that drink Tallboys on Tuesday night. But the KTM 390 motors have been produced at this facility for years at this point.
Right.
That includes the 390 Adventure models. I believe there's various other engine models that are now being produced at this factory too.
Yep.
And I recall when KTM first brought out the 390 that was produced in India, they were having pretty huge issues left and right with dropped valves, seized pistons, et cetera, et cetera. They had some serious teething issues starting out. And unfortunately, you're still paying KTM prices. That's kind of the downside of all this. None of these savings are passed on to the customer naturally. It all just goes to the quarterly meeting where somebody pats themselves on the back and says, well, we saved the company this much money at the cost of the consumer. But I fear that it's a matter of time before even your EXC models and stuff like that are also going to start having engines that are produced somewhere like India. I would really like to see the off-road oriented models continue to be developed, produced, etc. in Austria, but I really don't know where things are heading because ultimately price cost is the driving factor of virtually all business decisions. So
you're absolutely right, man. KTM definitely heavily involved in India. I mean, India, I don't think people realize just how big of a country India is.
They really don't.
How much money that country has to invest in things. Like you said, there was a bunch of teething problems with that 390. I know that the Duke 390 was pretty much all manufactured in India.
Yeah.
The 390 Adventure, most of it's manufactured in India. And like we said, when I sent you that article, it was absolutely mind blowing to see that Bajaj, or however you pronounce it, company owns a 48% stake in the KTM AG.
Yeah.
And that's really a driving force into what we're talking about is where is this money coming from in these corporations? Because the two main players right now, India and China, they have so much money and want to get into this market so badly, they're willing to sell their souls to hop on the train and say, hey, we're manufacturing this. KTM's not any different from the other manufacturers when it comes to China. CF Moto has been producing the 790 and 890 motors for years. Same deal. They got a contract where when the contract was up, they were allowed to use that engine in their own proprietary chassis with the new CF Moto 800. I know.
But again, just like we talked about, the Japanese manufacturers relying heavily on Thailand and similar locations for production. KTM's hiding behind the, we're still developed in Austria type thing. Like they weigh extremely heavily on the vision of overall quality of craftsmanship. And I know some people are going to disagree because it's KTM, but that's okay. Does not hurt my feelings. But they're pulling a craftsman.
Yeah, they are 100%.
Looking now to 10 years down the road, I think KTM is going to revert to the view among the riding community that they had in the early 2000s.
Yep.
Bikes were largely unreliable junk. I really fear that things are going to end up going back in that direction. I might be entirely wrong. Like I said before, you can produce, fantastic quality parts from, pretty much any location as long as your quality control and your machining methods and everything are well established and set up. But the driving factor of producing in India is cutting costs. So how am I expected to believe they're not also cutting costs any and everywhere else they possibly can?
Yep.
That's my ultimate sticking point is I don't have any issue with things not being produced in certain countries or the fact that they are produced in certain countries. It's that ultimately, me as a consumer am expecting something that's reasonably reliable. And if you're already cutting costs to the extent that you've decided to go to, a developing country that is cheap largely because they pay next to nothing, that's something that needs to be brought up. KTM didn't go and do this because they thought it was just going to be a great opportunity for these Indian workers that are making next to no money. It's cheap for a reason.
Yep.
Labor in these countries is it's just cheap. It's just a simple fact of life there.
I mean, China, you have slaves making your bike parts. I mean, it's 100% just
But
bottom line.
the other edge to that is, they are providing jobs, skilled labor jobs, to these areas that otherwise these people would be relying on, even less well paying or worse paying, however you want to look at it, jobs. And it's, geopolitics is extremely complicated, and I try not to get too deep into it. I'll just leave it at that. But
no, that's a great way to look at it. And that's something I didn't really think about either is, even if it's horrible, it's still providing an opportunity that maybe those people wouldn't have otherwise.
Working for KTM and one of these countries, assembling parts is likely far, far better than toiling out in the fields.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying that's the only other option there, but you kind of get where I'm going with it.
Yep, I got you.
Ultimately, until it can be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that the quality control and everything is every bit as good as it would have been had it been produced in the country that they act like it's produced in, I'm going to assume otherwise.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head with the Craftsman analogy there. Grandpa's Craftsman wrench lasted since 1964, so Grandpa's KTM 500 EXCs lasted 50 years, so I'm going to go buy a new KTM 500 EXC. Well, your cookie cutter clutch plates probably aren't going to hold up a whole lot there.
But since we're talking about the future, I know I guess it's not off topic. Everything's going to end up being electric.
Yeah, and it's going to go that way.
And my biggest fear for that is everything's just going to feel the same.
Yeah.
Like every manufacturer is going to prioritize that instant hit of torque at 0 RPM that electric motors are known for. I was eating dinner watching a video about the Sur Storm B or something like that.
Yeah.
Projecting like 300 pound-feet of torque. And, I was telling Shiloh, this is absolutely ridiculous. That amount of power will do one of two things. It will either break the back end loose no matter what you try to do, or if it hooks, it'll stand you up and buck you off. Yeah. But I think that as the proliferation of electric bikes becomes more common, electronic components are a lot more predictable to manufacture than a motor. I work in an industry where fractions of a thousandth of an inch of tolerance are starting to, that's something you have to take into consideration, stacking tolerances on, fractions of a thousandth. And what goes into producing an engine, you've got all these different components that are mating together that are of various levels of tolerance, that it all has to stack up at the end to be within an acceptable range. Versus an electric motor, you have, especially if it's brushless, you have your rotor and your stator. And then whatever, if you have an electric bike that has gears and transmission, I guess what I'm trying to boil it down to is I think that this will be a moot point argument when all bikes are electric.
Yep.
I think they will be so close to one another because all the chips that control these things, the electronic components, etc., they're already produced in China, Thailand, etc.
Yep.
There's not the room for variation. There's not the chance of, a 16th inch oil galley being clogged because somebody forgot to blow the chips out after operation number 47.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's going to be like that at all. That's the way I see things going. And Chinese companies have already taken the electric bike market by storm.
Yep.
Well established manufacturers like KTM are getting blown out of the water by companies like Sur, which I guess there's different ways of looking at it. I really am partial to internal combustion engines as an engineer and a overall mechanical design nerd. I am really just partial to internal combustion, but
Whenever they ban gasoline, I'm going to be the guy that made the homemade ethanol,
yep.
rolling down 70 West as fast as I can on the 500.
I will do everything in my power to make sure that Mark Niggemeyer's diesel KLR is supplied with cooking oil and whatever else you can get a hold of. But yeah, I don't think that this is an argument that we're going to be able to have in 20 years.
No, you're right.
That everything's going to be so similar that it's almost not arguable. I know electric cars are kind of already going to the same extent in the relatively short period of time they've been mainstream. Is a lot of reviewers have said this pretty much all just feels the same, save for like a few small quirks or something like that. Yeah. So I think that's where things are going to end up.
Yep, I agree with you, man. Well, I think one of the last things to kind of segue into on this topic is we can kind of go off of Husqvarna first off to kind of segue into this, and that is brand, I don't know what you call it, necromancy, bringing it back from the dead.
Yeah.
Poor Husqvarna. They have been through so much through their entire existence. They started out as a Swedish company, innovative, producing high quality motorcycles, back in the 70s, 80s, competitive with everything else. Kind of fell off like a lot of those old manufacturers do,
Fortunately.
You get into the 80s and technology, and they didn't catch up, and they couldn't sustain what they had. So they kind of went away. They were kind of an obscure Swedish company, and then along comes some investor groups. They moved the facility to Italy. They kind of reinvigorate everything. Hey, gabagool, we're getting some cool bikes out,
Yeah.
And that doesn't last very long. They get thrown by the wayside. They end up getting bought by BMW, who wants to try to get into the motocross market. I actually had one of the Husky TE 449s, which was a very odd BMW Rotax engine design that lasted 2 or 3 years. BMW decides it's not for them anymore. They pull out. KTM swoops in and buys Husky, and the rest is history for Husky. I think they kind of saved him, honestly. But at that same time, Husky or KTM had Husaberg, and they decided to shelve Husaberg, and we're going to bring in Husky. It's a new brand.
They saved the name.
Yeah, save the name.
That was it. Because I remember like seeing like a Husqvarna TE 610 or something like that, and that was back when they had red plastics, and
yep,
they're one of the cooler looking street legal dual sports that I've ever seen in my life.
Yep.
And now it's a blue and white KTM.
Yep. And Italy is probably the absolute worst when it comes to badge and brand engineering.
Yep.
Italy has, I got my notes here. I have at least 5 or 6 different companies that were defunct in the late 60s, early 70s that no one even remembers. And these Chinese investment groups come in, decide they want to get into the motorcycle industry. They build a factory, take over a factory, pump the money in, and now, oh, hey, we have Benelli again. We have Moto Marini, these Italian gabagool sounding names that are 100% Chinese companies.
What's that company, TYM or TM?
SWM. That's probably the one caveat that is actually pretty decent, because SWM is a Chinese investment firm that came in and bought the Italian Husqvarna factory, actually hired all of their R&D, everybody that used to work for Husky in the Italian. They call that the redhead Husky days. There's actually a website dedicated to those Husqvarnas that were made in Italy. But yeah, that SWM is probably the one manufacturer that I give credit for. I honestly would love to try one of their RS 500 dual sports. They got rave reviews. Anything that, and it kind of reinvigorated a lot of the older Huskies of that era too, because now you can actually get parts for those things. That was the dying wish for those guys, was be able to get any type of parts for those things. Well, now you can put SWM plastic, you can get your parts. It's just an Italian Husqvarna. They're actually pretty good bikes, but yeah, SWM, Moto Marini, Benelli, countless others. I mean, they're all Chinese copies of other bikes. Like, I know everybody's really excited about that Moto Marini Escape 650. It's a Kawasaki Versus with better suspension. which I would like to have. I have a Kawasaki Versys.
That actually sounds kind of interesting. But
Yeah.
Shout out to Ray Hugh from down in, I think,
Spain. Yep.
They are the original gas factory that was bought out by a Chinese investment group. And from what I understand, they are making some pretty well-built two-strokes. The price reflects it. They are not on the cheaper end of two-strokes, but the guys that run them say that they've some serious thought that's been put into the overall design and ergonomics, etc.
That was a shame because right before Gas got bought out by KTM, they completely retooled everything for a new bike. They had it all ready to go and then shelved it because KTM bought them over. Really, KTM, I everything I've read and heard, they wanted to get into the trials market, which is one of the main factors for them purchasing Gas was an easy way for them to get into the trials market. But yeah, shout out to the investment teams in China that come in and bought Reiju. And like you said, they're actually really awesome hardcore enduro bikes. We got a local guy that races for Leeson's Import Motors. They are a Raiju supplier now. Brennan Poling, he's a factory racer for Raiju. And the videos that I've seen, he's right up there mixing it up bar to bar with all the big name guys in the factory teams. Look like excellent bikes. I know they're really popular in the hardcore enduro and like the hard enduro scene now.
They largely come set up from factory with a lot of the stuff that you're going to throw on there anyway. So I think they're pretty good value. On the topic of Italian brands, Beta seems to put some pretty serious research and development into their bikes. I know they've got a pretty solid line of two-strokes, including they have a 200 that I'd really like to try at some point. They got some 125 Screamers. I owned a Beta 4-stroke for a period of time. Very well-made bike. Had no complaints there.
That's another KTM shell company that started out sort of because the first Beta 450s were RFS KTMs with red plastic.
They've come a long way. I mean, they've created their own specific engine design, architecture, etc. I don't know where they're produced. They might be produced in a factory in China for all I know. But I remember seeing a video here recently of over in Europe, your license classes are based on like years of having a license versus maximum displacement that you can run. So like you have 125cc class. Well, a lot of guys will run 125cc two-strokes because you can have something that you can actually rip on versus 125 4-stroke is like something you go get groceries with. But it was a video of a Beta 125, like whatever license class that is, bike, and the guy took a screwdriver and put it under like a little part of the engine side case and popped off that big, nice embossed Beta stylized B. It says Yamaha right under it. Just a Yamaha 125 motor under there.
There's a couple Italian companies that do that. Fantic is a very super fancy Yamaha. All their stuff is just Yamaha made with different plastic. There's another one too. I'm drawing a blank right now, but it's KX450 4-stroke, like the KX450 XCs that has like white and red plastic. It's an Italian made KX450. It has different exhaust and an oversized tank. I can't remember the name of it.
I can't either. I remember sending you that article and we both like, man, this is just a Kawasaki with a different size tank.
Yeah, man. The Italians though, it's open season for Chinese investors to come in, and you know, it's something to utilize all the history and heritage of that name. You know, like I'm gonna be honest with you, I've rode a few of the Benelli bikes, not been impressed. It's super heavy, underpowered, but you've got the Benelli name. It's a fancy. It's an Italian.
Everything is just attempting to ride on the illusion of what you're getting.
Yep.
So I don't see that going away anytime soon. That's just going to be a fact of life moving forward, unfortunately.
The only other company that really I got notes on that we didn't really touch on was it's kind of funny. CSC, California Scooter Company.
Yeah.
That's 100% Chinese bikes. They have the what is it? It's they got it like an enduro dual sport version of that RPS Hawk. That's
I remember they had they came out with like an adventure style bike that was it was like a 400cc displacement, horsepower, and one of the side cases broke off when they were testing it or something like that.
They had two of them. One was the RX3, which was the Zongshin 250cc liquid cooled engine in a 500-pound adventure bike.
Okay, that's what it was.
And then the other one was the RX3 or RX4, excuse me, which was the Zongshin 450 engine, the same one I had in my GPX that weighed 500 and some pounds. You still had all the problems of the horrible fuel injection with even worse chassis design and something else that you can't get parts for.
Like we touched on, if you want a Chinese bike, that's cool. There's a lot of resources out there, but parts availability is huge. I mean, you think just between the two of us, what consumables we run through in a year's worth of riding season. I absolutely do not want the headache of having to wait for a shipping container to make its way across an ocean so I can get parts. I want to be able to either order them directly from an online supplier or go to a parts counter at a dealer locally and get them, within the same week.
Yeah. I don't think that the parts manufacturers look at these corporations and say, hey, there's a segment that we can make $1 million off of quickly, because you're not going to. The rider segment's not there. If they continue to produce accessories for an XR650L that's been around for 20 years, well, they know that they're going to sell a certain amount of those every single year. This is easy money versus a skid plate for a Moto Morini 650. Like, there's going to be a few guys out there, and there'll be some niche markets pop up, some kind of fly-by-night garage businesses make that type of thing, but like big manufacturers aren't going to get into that.
Or XR rack or whatever that you that's another problem too. If you're going to get serious about dual sporting from a standpoint of like trail riding, stuff like that, if you have a lesser well-known brand of machine or well-known model, your aftermarket support is going to be extremely limited. I know that I had my KLX 250 and AJ had his CRF 250L. It seemed like there was everything you could ever imagine to bolt onto a CRF 250L at your fingertips, and stuff for my KLX would take forever. They never even released like the Achirby's side frame guards, that you can get your boots up against and give you a little bit better grip. I even messaged Achirby's and they said, nope, we've got no plans on building those. And I even mentioned the email that I sent to them and said, hey, Kawasaki just came out to 300L. If you guys don't have this yet, it might be something you want to think about. And they said, nope, we've got no interest. So, that just is what it is. I'm sure somebody sat down, crunched the numbers, and found out the amount of money that's needed for the design and the injection molds and everything just wasn't going to work out. And if it doesn't work out for, higher numbers bike like a Kawasaki 250 or 300, it is definitely not going to be a thing for your Hawk 250 at any point. But at the same time, guys with Hawk 250s aren't looking for like hop-up parts or like enduro parts typically. So
no, but I'll give the people credit. It takes a special type of person to buy a Chinese motorcycle. You have to be willing to wrench on the thing and figure out what parts they've copied and what you can do to make it better. And there's a huge resource of people out there, like I mentioned, that Moto Cheese guy that has that information out there just because they're willing to try it. They're willing to push the envelope a little bit and figure out what they can do to make it work better.
I mean, if you like to tinker, if you're mechanically minded and don't readily pull all your hair out when things aren't going your way in the garage, then I think a Chinese bike is a fine opportunity. Like I said, there's guys on ChinaRiders.com that have upwards of 50,000 miles on Zongshin engines. It's just a matter of what you want to get yourself into.
Are you willing to put up with the headache? And trust me, it's a headache. Just buy a regular bike. I think we'll kind of wrap this up. We'll get into a few comments that we have here. We'll start out here. This was from Rob. He says his sister-in-law has a green DRZ 400. KLX. You remember seeing the video? I think it was up in PA somewhere. There was like a really bad landslide, and the road had completely caved into this sinkhole. And there was a guy on a KLX 400 that drops into that thing and jumps out the other side. He's like 40 feet in the air and just flat lands that KLX 400 down on the road. That was pretty awesome. Let's see. Rob also says that they have a green DRZ 125, KLX 125, which I think it's a 140 now. They've kind of bumped it up to that. Our buddy Tyler Vincent says even less than Harbor Freight most of the times. That was when we were talking about the Sears tools. Yeah, Harbor Freight's a whole could be a whole show by itself about what's good and what's not from there. It definitely has its place, and I own a bunch of those Harbor Freight.
I got a pile of Harbor Freight tools myself.
Yep. Let's see who else we got here. Rob says he's been to the Christini shop in Philly. That's pretty cool. That'd be interesting to get into.
Yeah.
I know one of my buddies, Josh Miller, has the 300cc two-stroke Christini, which is a gas that's been made into the two-stroke bike. That's pretty cool. Tyler Vincent says the DRZ 400s are 9,300 out the door now. That's insane to think about that.
That's at that point, like we talked about, having the R&D paid off forever ago. That is absolute insanity.
And Rob, Bimoto, that's the company that makes the Italian copies of the 450 Cowboys. Yep.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, man. All right, man. Anything else we missed you want to touch on?
I think we touched on pretty much everything. I felt that was a pretty good look into the brand engineering and kind of the shadier side of a lot of these brands as to where they're using their parts and what they've got going on.
Yeah, you'd be surprised at how things are done in backroom deals anywhere, not even just the motorcycle industry, the car industry, anything you buy. You're manufactured in China, and hopefully we don't get owned by them soon.
Well, again, geopolitics, I'll stay out of it, but we'll see.
All right, guys. Well, we appreciate you tuning in and sticking with us here. Feel like it was a pretty good topic. It's always good to blow off some steam on a Tuesday and drink some beer with my buddy and talk about some stuff that we got a little bit of knowledge about. And with that, we'll sign off and we'll see you guys next week.
We'll see you guys. Thanks.
Take care.